There are celebrity moments, and then there are those rare cultural flashpoints that seem to pull in everyone at once, the kind that lives somewhere between entertainment, sports, gossip, and genuine human curiosity. This story has become one of those moments. The names involved are enormous, the audience is global, and every little detail instantly becomes headline material. That is why even a casual joke about a wedding invitation can set off a wave of excitement. When the question was thrown out about whether Andy Reid had received his invitation to the wedding of Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift, the answer was exactly what people hoped it would be. Funny, relaxed, and unmistakably warm. Reid didn't come across like a man trying to steal attention or reveal some great secret. He sounded like someone who understands the madness around the story but refuses to lose sight of what actually matters. He joked that he probably had an invitation, and if he didn't outgrow his tuxedo before the big day, then he would be there. It was a classic Andy Reid answer, humorous without being flashy, grounded without being cold, and instantly memorable because it felt so natural. You could hear the room lean into the moment because everyone knew what kind of news cycle they were participating in. This was bigger than football chatter and bigger than celebrity gossip. It had become a modern fairy tale told in sports bars, on social feeds, in entertainment segments, and in everyday conversation. But what makes that quote land is not just the joke about the tuxedo. It's what came after it. Reid made it clear that he was happy for them, and in a world that often treats high-profile relationships like content before anything else, that simple sincerity mattered. He cut through the spectacle by saying what a lot of people tend to forget when a couple like this becomes a phenomenon. It doesn't matter how large the show around them gets if the center of it is real. In his view, they are in love, and that is the point. That is the heart of the whole story. It is easy for everyone else to get distracted by the cameras, the fame, the economics of attention, the ratings, the social media conversation, the endless breakdown of every public appearance. Yet Reid, with one of those deceptively simple comments, reframed the entire narrative. Beneath all the noise are two people who want to be around each other. Beneath all the scrutiny is a relationship that appears to have grown stronger while the world kept watching. And beneath all the viral moments, there is something old-fashioned and almost refreshingly straightforward. Two highly visible people who found someone they genuinely want to build a life with. That is why his earlier reaction to their engagement carried so much weight. He didn't talk like a publicist, and he didn't talk like someone dazzled by the celebrity of it all. He spoke like a man who has lived long enough to know how unusual it is for two people to find the right fit at the right time. He said it is hard to find someone you really fall in love with. That line matters because it sounds simple, but it comes from experience. Reid has been around football long enough to see careers begin, peak, and end. He has seen young athletes grow up. He has lived through pressure, change, success, disappointment, reinvention, and family life in full public view. So when he says finding real love is not easy, it doesn't sound like a cliche. It sounds like perspective. And when he says it seems like Travis and Taylor are there, the remark carries the weight of someone who has observed the relationship at close range, not as a fan, but as someone in the orbit of one of the people involved. He goes further and calls it a great deal for both of them, not because of fame, not because of branding, not because of publicity, but because they seem to enjoy being together. That is his test. Do they like being around each other? Do they handle life well together? Can they move through all this attention and still seem like themselves? In his eyes, the answer appears to be yes. That theme runs through the entire conversation surrounding them. The fascination is partly due to how unusual this pairing first seemed to the outside world. One is a global music superstar whose personal life has long been the subject of intense cultural obsession. The other is a future Hall of Fame tight end, a larger-than-life football personality, charismatic, funny, and confident enough to turn a missed opportunity into one of the most famous romantic openings in recent memory. Their worlds overlap in fame, but the ecosystems are different. Music fandom is not the same as sports fandom. Stadium tours and NFL seasons do not operate on the same rhythms. The machinery of celebrity reporting is different from the machinery of football analysis. Yet somehow the relationship bridged those worlds in a way that felt less manufactured over time and more surprisingly organic. That is part of why people kept leaning in. At first, the public wanted to know whether it was real. Then they wanted to know whether it would last. Then they became interested in what kind of couple they actually were behind the giant headlines. And every time people expected the whole thing to feel overly polished or distant, another detail would emerge that made it feel more human. That is where the New Heights conversation becomes so valuable. It strips away some of the polished media framing and replaces it with something more revealing, humor, affection, and the kind of storytelling that only works when people feel comfortable with each other. When the topic came up that Andy Reid had recently suggested he was the one who set them up, the response from Travis and Taylor was playful rather than defensive. They did not rush to correct the story or take ownership of every detail like two people trying to control a narrative. Instead, they leaned into it. If Big Red says he deserves the credit, then fine, let him have it. That reaction says a lot. It suggests a comfort level with the mythology around their relationship. It suggests they understand how stories evolve once the public gets hold of them. More importantly, it suggests they are secure enough not to get precious about the exact mechanics of who introduced whom, who first vouched for whom, or who gets labeled the Cupid in the story. And then Taylor begins talking about her father, Scott, and the whole conversation shifts into something unexpectedly rich. What she says about him does more than add a funny family anecdote. It opens a window into how this relationship may have gained momentum in a very real world way, through networks of trust, recommendation, and personal character. She describes her father as perhaps the most social man ever born, a kind of unstoppable connector who can meet a stranger for 5 minutes decades ago and still maintain that relationship as if no time has passed. It is a vivid description because everyone knows a person like that, though very few know someone to that extreme. Scott is painted almost like a force of nature, a social savant, someone who doesn't merely collect acquaintances but builds meaningful relationships with astonishing ease. That is important because it gives context to how Andy Reid could already exist in Taylor's world before Travis and Taylor became a public couple. Reid was not just some distant football figure. He was someone her father knew, someone who had been around, someone who already carried a positive reputation in the family's mind. That piece of the story makes the whole relationship feel less like a random collision of two mega famous lives and more like a connection that was quietly supported by people who knew pieces of both worlds. Taylor says she had always had a positive feeling about Andy Reid. At one point, she jokes that she didn't even fully know what sports he was doing, but she knew he was her dad's friend, Andy Reid. There is something charming about that line because it compresses the absurdity of modern fame. One of the most successful artists in the world is casually referring to a legendary football coach as the guy her dad knows. It brings everybody down to earth. Fame starts to disappear, and what remains is familiarity. Not headlines, not brands, not industries, but people who know each other. The conversation then moves into an even more revealing territory when Taylor talks about why she respects Andy Reid so much. She praises his leadership style in a way that sounds genuinely observant. What stands out to her is not intensity for its own sake, not volume, not ego, and not some exaggerated image of toughness. She admires that he leads without seeming consumed by aggression. He does not need to raise his voice constantly or lose control in order to command respect. Instead, he appears composed, focused, and intentional. That word, intentional, becomes one of the most important ideas in the whole exchange. In her description, Reid is the kind of leader whose actions have purpose. Nothing feels random. Nothing feels emotional in the sloppy sense. If he pushes, there is a reason. If he corrects, there is a reason. If he shows warmth, that also has a deeper meaning because it comes from a man who is otherwise so disciplined. She is not simply complimenting him as a football coach. She is offering an analysis of character. Travis then adds the athlete's perspective, and together their comments create a remarkably complete portrait of leadership. He agrees that Reid can absolutely tear into players, but the difference is that when he does, it feels deserved. It is not chaos. It is not humiliation for show. It is not someone losing the room by losing himself. It is instruction attached to accountability. Travis makes clear that when Reid gets on you, it comes with credibility. It comes from someone who sees what you can be and refuses to let you settle below it. That is why players respond. Not because they are afraid of random anger, but because they understand the standard behind it. Taylor picks up on that and interprets it beautifully. She says it only makes sense for him to correct you that way if he sees greatness in you, if he believes you are capable of getting it right. In other words, the discipline is not the opposite of care. It is one of the expressions of care. That is a sophisticated point, and it explains why both Travis and Taylor seem to admire Reid beyond his resume. Jason, sitting in the middle of this conversation, crystallizes it in a memorable way. He points out that Reid has a kind of stoicism, and that when a person like that suddenly reveals warmth, it lands differently. The softer moments feel earned because they emerge from discipline rather than replacing it. That is why he jokes about seeing the teddy bear underneath the composed exterior. Again, this matters because the script is not just about a celebrity couple. It is about the people around them and what those people reveal about the values at play. Reid's role in the story is not merely comic relief or gossip fuel. He symbolizes steadiness. He represents the trusted elder figure, the man who has seen enough of life to distinguish noise from substance. When he says he is happy for them, it doesn't feel like a throwaway soundbite. It feels like a subtle endorsement from someone who values seriousness, loyalty, work, and authenticity. Then the conversation returns to the central mystery in a way that is both hilarious and revealing. Jason essentially asks the question everyone wants answered. What exactly did Andy tell Scott? Did he say something specific? Did he help move this whole thing along? And Taylor's answer may be the most important part of the entire story, because it explains how a public gesture turned into a private opening. She references the moment when Travis publicly shot his shot on the podcast, a moment that by then had become legendary. He was direct, funny, and bold enough to take the kind of swing most people only imagine taking. What happened next, according to Taylor, was not normal. People started reaching out to the people around her. Relatives, cousins, friends, and yes, people like Andy Reid began vouching for Travis. That phrase is everything. They vouched for him. They did not merely say he was famous or successful or fun. They said he was amazing. They insisted that she understand what kind of man he was. That changes the texture of the love story entirely. A lot of celebrity romances are told as if chemistry alone drives everything. Two glamorous people meet, sparks fly, and the rest writes itself. But this story, as described here, contains another ingredient: community verification. The people around Taylor were not warning her, or hedging, or staying carefully neutral. They were advocating. They were saying, in effect, this person is good. This person is worth taking seriously. This person is not just charming in public. He is meaningful in private. That is a rare thing for anyone to hear, let alone someone operating at Taylor's level of fame and scrutiny. She even says it was not normal. It stood out to her that so many people were willing to go to bat for him. That line may sound casual, but it reveals just how much character testimony mattered. Think about what that says. In a world where public image can be manufactured and celebrity perception can be manipulated, the opinions that cut through the most are usually the ones from trusted people with nothing to gain. The fact that friends and family members independently had positive things to say about Travis appears to have mattered more than any headline ever could. It is one thing to be visible. It is another thing entirely to be endorsed by people whose judgment someone trusts. This makes the romance feel less like a random pop cultural event and more like a relationship that was quietly validated from the inside out. It also helps explain why their bond has seemed, to many observers, more grounded than the scale of their fame would suggest. They did not just meet as icons. They met with a network of human references around them saying, yes, this person is solid. The beauty of this narrative is that it combines the improbable with the familiar. On the surface, almost everything about it feels larger than life. A globally famous singer and a Super Bowl winning star become one of the most discussed couples on earth. Coaches make jokes on the radio, engagement news races through social media, every public outing becomes a media event. Yet underneath all that, the emotional mechanics are extremely recognizable. A man tries his luck in a bold but sincere way. People who know him speak up for him. A woman hears from those she trusts that there may be something real there. A connection deepens. Over time, what started as a cultural curiosity becomes a relationship that the people around them describe not as a spectacle, but as something meaningful. That is why audiences stay invested. The outer shell is dazzling, but the inner engine is ordinary in the best sense. It is about timing, reputation, mutual admiration, and the testimony of people who know the truth of someone's character. Andy Reid's role in the story, whether literal matchmaker or simply trusted advocate, is compelling for that reason. He is not presented as some mastermind behind the romance. He is more like one of the people whose approval meant something, whose voice carried weight, whose opinion helped confirm what others were already saying. If he vouched for Travis, that matters because Reid is not the kind of figure associated with frivolity. His public persona is built on steadiness, competence, trust, and wisdom earned over decades. So when someone like that says, in effect, this guy is the real deal, that can resonate more deeply than 100 glossy introductions. It also says something about Travis. People who spend years under tough leadership in professional sports do not often earn affectionate advocacy unless there is substance underneath the public charm. The portrait emerging here is of a man whose humor and confidence are obvious to everyone, but whose generosity and heart are what make insiders speak up. That is why the later wedding banter works so well as the opening beat of the story. It sounds like a joke, but it only lands because it sits on top of something sincere. Reid can laugh about the tuxedo and brush off the glamour of the event because he is not seduced by the spectacle. He can joke that he is not the show, that he is just going to show up because he understands his role. He is not trying to insert himself into a celebrity fairy tale. He is a supportive elder in the background, amused by the scale of the attention but focused on the people involved. In fact, his refusal to perform excitement in an exaggerated way makes his happiness more believable. He does not need to gush. He does not need to dramatize. He simply says he is happy for them, and that feels enough. There is also something very telling in how Travis and Taylor talk about leadership, because it hints at why they may fit together. Taylor clearly values intentionality, emotional control, discipline, and quiet confidence. Travis, despite his fun-loving public personality, seems to respond deeply to the same things. He respects leadership that combines high standards with heart. He understands the difference between authority and theatrics. He admires someone who can correct without humiliating, guide without posturing, and stay focused under pressure. These are not shallow traits. They point to what each of them notices and values in people. And that matters because lasting relationships are often built not just on chemistry, but on compatible respect systems. The way they both talk about Reid suggests that they are paying attention to the same qualities. Composure, trust, intention, and care expressed through action rather than performance. That shared language also tells us something about how they likely perceive each other. The public often reduces celebrity couples to aesthetic pairings, branding synergies, or simple chemistry. But this conversation implies something deeper. They seem to admire substance. They seem drawn to people who are dependable under pressure. They notice the architecture of character. That does not mean they are solemn all the time. On the contrary, much of their charm as a couple comes from humor, ease, and playful banter. But beneath the jokes, there appears to be a strong appreciation for groundedness. Maybe that is one reason the relationship has resonated so widely. For all the glamour surrounding them, the tone of the people closest to the story is not airy or superficial. It is practical. He is a great guy. She is happy. They like being around each other. They are busy, famous people who still make time for one another. They have support from people who know them. Strip away the celebrity, and that is how real relationships are often described. The phrase, shooting your shot heard around the world, captures the mythic side of the story, and deservedly so. It was bold, funny, and public in a way that instantly translated to entertainment culture. But Taylor's explanation of what followed gives the moment its emotional credibility. His shot did not land simply because it was viral. It landed because trusted people confirmed the character behind the confidence. In that sense, the public story and the private story finally intersected. The world saw a charismatic athlete making a move. The people close to her saw an opportunity to say yes, but you should also know that he is kind, genuine, and worth your attention. The magic is not in choosing one version over the other. It is in seeing how both were necessary. The public boldness made the story visible. The private endorsements made it viable. And that ultimately is why the entire conversation feels bigger than tabloid chatter. It is not just about whether a wedding will be extravagant, who got invited, or who played Cupid. It is about how, even in the most hyper-public, overexposed corner of modern culture, people still search for the same old assurances. Is this person good to you? Do they make your life better? Do they show up with consistency, not just style? Do the people who know them best trust them? Does love seem real when the cameras are off? Andy Reid, in his own understated way, seems to believe the answer is yes. Taylor's description of the people whispering in her ear points to the same conclusion. Travis's loyalty and respect toward Reid suggest a man who values structure, guidance, and accountability. Put all of it together, and the story starts to feel less like a media invention and more like a relationship that earned its own momentum. So if you expand this moment into a broader narrative, it is not really a story about fame at all, even if fame is the packaging. It is a story about endorsement, about a public gesture backed by private character. It is about a coach who sees beyond headlines. It is about a father whose gift for human connection quietly links worlds that otherwise might never have met. It is about a woman listening carefully to the people she trusts and noticing that the praise is not superficial but unusually sincere. It is about a man whose personality is big enough to attract global attention, but whose goodness may have mattered even more once the spotlight shifted. And it is about the rare moment when everyone around a very public couple seems to be saying the same thing. Beneath all the noise, these two actually make sense. That is why the wedding jokes feel light instead of cynical. That is why the engagement reaction feels sweet instead of manufactured. That is why the conversation about Andy Reid setting them up works as more than a punchline. Each piece feeds the same larger impression. The world may frame them as a spectacle, but the people near them talk about them like a pair of human beings who found something meaningful. The coach talks about love being hard to find. The family friend network speaks up on his behalf. The couple laughs about how it all came together. And somehow the whole thing becomes even more compelling because no one closest to it sounds dazzled by celebrity. They sound relieved, amused, and genuinely glad. In the end, maybe that is what makes this story stick. Not the scale, but the balance. It has the scale of a pop cultural earthquake, but the emotional structure of something very familiar. A bold beginning, a chorus of trusted voices, mutual admiration, shared values, quiet endorsements from people who matter, a relationship that survives the transition from curiosity to commitment. The tuxedo joke is fun, the wedding speculation is irresistible, the idea of Andy Reid as Cupid is hilarious, but the lasting image is simpler than that. It is an older coach smiling at the chaos, shrugging off the circus around it, and reminding everyone of the only part he thinks truly counts. They are in love. Everything else is just the show.